I'm not sure what obsessed me more about Rickey Henderson. The fact that I was calling him the greatest living ball player before Rickey just a couple of months ago,
right, I think
and
we had a
now
whole
he's
thing on
gone. I feel like really bad, not just in general because it's horrible that it happened. And untimely passing of Rickey Henderson, who we believe succumbed to pneumonia, and I didn't know that he had the health problems that he did because he's so young. He's not even a year older than me. So
very unfortunate,
really,
to see
really.
a guy with a 25-year major league career, and what's considered by many to be currently the greatest living ball player. And it's, sad to see somebody that was such, and he was by all accounts a very good guy. At least, he did a lot for the community there in Oakland. So I think it's kind of interesting because I don't think he had that reputation necessarily as a player.
Well, I don't know. Actually, I think as a teammate,
yes.
Everybody always had the nicest things to say about him in terms of how supportive he was and how good he was, by the way. And of course, he had his own way of being Rickey, and Rickey being Rickey. By the way, did you ever meet another guy named Rickey or read about a guy named Rickey who spelled his name Rickey? Right, he had the extra E in his name, right? And I don't think I've ever seen another Rickey that way. So
you think there'd be more since then?
A Lime Rickey, would be that way. Branch Rickey, but that was his last name.
Right, but he's not the only one that's ever been.
But Rickey Henderson, who came up, I think, in 1976, and Dave Stewart was one of his best friends, was talking about how he came up in 1975, and they knew each other both from the West Coast, and finally got to play with each other on those A's teams that won the World Series in the late 80s. And look, everywhere Rickey Henderson went, and obviously the greatest leadoff hitter in Major League history.
Without a doubt.
I don't think there's even a question of that. He played on good teams for most of his career, and it's not a coincidence.
It's weird to think that his career in Oakland overlaps the Bash. Does it overlap the Bash brothers at all, or was he in New York by the time?
He was in New York. Actually, he did get traded over to Orlando during the '89 season. Oakland.
Okay.
In the '89 season, so he was there for that second of the two championships in '88 and '89 for the A's.
Okay, so he was there, even though he spent a good bit of the time where the Bash brothers sort of came up on the Yankees. Interestingly, and you don't see a lot of guys bounce between the coasts like that. He was an A, then he was a Yankee, then he went back to the A's. We're actually ending up back in New York, I think, later on again.
Well,
both for the Mets and for the Yankees.
Yeah. And by the way, the last season he played for the Mets. I think he hit something like, I want to say he hit. Well, it says here.
His last full season in '99, he hit
99.
.315, and he stole 42 bases at the age of 30. At the age of 40.
I mean and that's a season that the Mets, had a good season and they went to the playoffs. I think famously Rickey was in the clubhouse playing cards or something like that.
He had 128 OPS plus that season, so he had that was really the last great season that he had, because everything else sort of in the surrounding 10 or so 7 or 8 years is pretty lackluster in comparison.
Now, it's not just that he has the all-time total Major League steals record with 1,406, shattering.
He's also got their caught stealing record.
He's also got the caught stealing, but that's because he tried so much, and he bypassed Ty Cobb and in the
He's
career
also
record.
the all-time run leader.
I think that's the more important thing, right? Because the purpose in baseball is to score runs. Nobody scored more runs than Rickey Henderson with his 2,295 runs.
That's going to be a hard record, I think, for any one guy to break.
That's a great point, right? Because you got to play 25 years.
Right.
You got to be able to score runs when you're 40.
Right. And he was still an effective runner late into his career.
40 steals when he was 40 almost. We said 42 in his
42 in that season.
In that 99 season.
He had 42 in 2001 when he was 42. So that's not a lot of guys could be stealing the number of bases their age once they're in their 40s. So that's definitely going to lead him to being somebody that was still a very effective base runner, because not only did he still have the speed, he was also a really good base runner. So he was always going to be somebody that scored more often than other guys.
I remember watching him play when he was well, I guess he wasn't uncatchable. Well, you can't say that because he got caught more than anybody else, because he ran more than anybody else. But he was more dangerous, we would say, on second base, stealing third, because it just seemed like he was almost already a third, when he was on second.
We could get even bigger leads off of it.
Right.
And it really helps because he was a guy that also walked a ton, which was the impressive thing, was that he not only did he hit for a good average, he was walking 100+ times in a season. So to have a guy with that kind of speed have that kind of batting eye, that's a dangerous combination.
There aren't a lot of players that have a career on base percentage over 400, and Rickey had it at 401.
Right, so for him to be a career 401 on base guy while being the greatest stolen base artist of all time, that's a pain for opposing offenses to deal with. And you can see why he won an MVP. He was that valuable.
And he probably could have won more MVPs because there just was nobody that did the things that Rickey Henderson did. By the way, he has the most home runs for a leadoff hitter in the history of Major League Baseball. So he has more leadoff home runs than anybody. Kyle Schwarber is trying to catch him. He will not.
He will not. But that's because almost all of Rickey's home runs came from the leadoff
Of course,
spot.
of course.
Now, I think with Rickey, what you're looking at is that probably teams did not understand how good having a 400 on base guy that stole like he did at the top of their lineup. I'm sure if he was playing in today's MLB, the advanced metrics would look on him so insanely well that he would be valued at a crazy rate comparatively.
I'm surprised that his career WAR isn't well. That's career WAR. His career WAR is 111. It's
right,
fine.
pretty good.
It's just fine. His ops plus at 127. Now, was he a power hitter? Well, he did have 297 career home runs,
Right,
so it wasn't like he didn't hit any.
But he didn't hit a lot of doubles. For a guy that, had decent power for somebody out of the leadoff spot, you would expect him to have seasons where, I think the most doubles in the season was 31 or 33. I would have expected him to have a couple 40 double seasons with the way he ran.
That's because he was a walking double.
Right.
Meaning that all he had to do was get him first base, and it was as good as being on second base.
Right.
He
But
didn't
that's
have
why,
to hit doubles.
But that's why his OPS is low, is because his slugging was never particularly
Right.
great. He was kind of a guy, because he would walk so much, that for him, a walk was just as good as a double.
But what you also have to think about, the guy played so darn long, right? You just go through his early career, ops plus, 135, 151, 122, 139, 146, 157, right? Those are the kinds of numbers you expected.
Right, but then you have the string of years where he's under 100 for like the whole back half of his career.
Well, not the back half. My good, he had played 20 years. He had
last 6
he
or
had
7
189 ops plus in his 11th year in the league. So.
Right, but he's down to 101 by
Right,
the time he's
right,
like, and then he plays a bunch of years where, other than that one turn back the year with the Mets, he was basically a league average ball player for those last 7 years, which is incredibly impressive at his age, but it's going to tank your statistics a little bit.
It's a really good point, because you think about had he played 20 seasons, right? His career numbers would have looked in some ways better because his metrics would have been better.
But yeah, you eliminate all these years where you didn't slug particularly well at the end of your career.
Your ops plus would be much higher. You wouldn't have lost much WAR, which is a cumulative
You'd have
stat,
a better
because-
on base. You'd have a higher on base.
Right.
So that would mostly be what it was. And the WAR, you didn't really hurt yourself, but you didn't really help yourself. So it's pretty much a net negative. It's a net push there. So by chopping off the last 5 or so years of his career, he comes out looking way better.
And the thing that strikes me always is that Rickey Henderson won a Gold Glove. Nobody ever thought Rickey Henderson was much of a fielder, by the way.
But he got
somehow
one.
In his third season, he won a Gold Glove.
He got the Silver Slugger and finished second in the MVP that season. That screams to me like concession award.
Well, particularly in that he never got another Gold Glove. So how do you get to a Gold Glove in your third season? Right? You're still young. You're 22 years old. You're you'd think that guy would, as we like to say, you end up owning the Gold Glove by incumbency. Except he never wins another one. Never gets another sniff, I guess, at a Gold Glove because he really wasn't that good. So how did he win that Gold Glove in the third season? So
right, and that's the year he lost it to a closer in Raleigh Fingers. He was finished second in 81
in the MVP.
In the MVP to Raleigh
Right.
Fingers.
Well, then people said that's probably one of the weakest MVPs because they didn't know how to value closers at the time. So they go, oh, he's a really good closer. He must be the most valuable player. No.
Yeah, and then you look at the season. Probably the guy that and it's because the league leaders in home runs in 81 was 22.
Yeah.
Nobody hit for any power that season for whatever reason in the AL.
Yeah. Well, and 81 was a strike season, so you didn't have as many games.
Right. But then you look over at the NL, and Mike Schmidt finished hitting .316 with 31 homers and 91 RBI
in a strike season.
So he just made it easy.
I don't really care. It doesn't matter. We're not playing that many games. I'm still gonna hit 30 home runs.
Right. And the Raleigh Finger finished probably a rare, just to digress for a moment, finished a rare accomplishment getting the Cy Young and the MVP in the same season. I don't think there's a lot of guys.
There are guys that Clayton Kershaw would be one of them.
Yes.
So I just can't tell you how much I admired the player, and how when we talked about the greatest living ball player, and kind of thinking about, okay, you had to take out Bonds because I still think it would be him, and if you want to take out A-Rod too, that was the whole point. You're going to take those guys out because you don't like them because of the steroid conversations or whatnot. What was left definitely to me was Rickey Henderson, who changed the game more than that guy. So
yeah, I think you could probably argue nobody.
So rest in peace, Rickey. We loved you probably more than you knew. As a player, Rickey being Rickey was a real fun thing to watch, and we'll be talking about him for a real long time. So rest in peace, Rickey. So today's episode was born out of something that I saw during the regular season. I don't remember, it was in the summertime, and I saw that Manny Machado had taken over the career home run leaders for the San Diego Padres. And so what it made me think is, well, he hasn't been there that long. How can he be the career leader in the home runs for the Padres? And then I'm starting to think, well, then who were the other guys on the Padres who were really good at hitting home runs? And not Tony Gwynn. Dave Winfield's in the Hall of Fame, but he only didn't play that long with them.
Right. He wasn't there long enough where you could just kind of default and give it to him.
So then I started thinking about all the other teams, and it's like, well, do I know inherently who the all-time the top 5 home run hitters, let's say, for each of the teams? And you know what? And we've talked about this before. A lot of them, but there are guys in there you think, oh,
right,
that guy's there.
It's interesting because there's some teams, at least top 5 is hard, because once you get outside of 2 for most teams, then you're really throwing up random names.
I couldn't even do it for the Mets in terms of knowing exactly who. I could give you guys that might be there.
Right. You kind of know who the guys are in contention. Some teams, like Atlanta Braves, that's a pretty easy one because there's this guy named Hank Aaron.
Yes. One of my favorite things about Hank Aaron was that before Barry Bonds, he and his brother Tommy had the all-time combined home runs for brothers in the Major League. Hank Aaron had 750, and Tommy had 18.
But they both hit him. But that's an easy one if you're looking at the Braves. Even the Phillies, I think, are pretty easy as long as you remember Mike Schmidt exists.
Right, and you can't think of Chuck Klein. I remember he played for the Phillies, and he was a big hitter back in the 30s and all that, and he could, but I don't think he didn't hit 500 home runs. I know that.
Right, that's the thing. You have to think about when you're thinking about the players. When certain names come to mind, you have to think there's not that many guys that hit 550 home runs in their career in all of baseball. So it's really unlikely that there's only one team in the National League that I can think of that has 2 guys with 500 plus home runs off the top of my head.
Yeah, and that would be
the San Francisco Giants.
Yeah, well, and that would be actually, there's 3 guys. Well, no, because Willie McCovey hit 475.
Right. 2 teammates with 500 home runs. I don't think there's any.
Well, they weren't teammates. 2 guys on the same team.
2 guys on the same team.
Right.
They played for the
McCovey
same
and Mays
franchise.
were teammates.
Right.
But and you got McCovey who.
Well, the
comes
Giants
in
have
at
multiple guys that did it because Mel Ott also did it for them.
All right, at 511 all for the Giants. So the Braves, just going back to them. So Eddie Matthews had 500 home runs at third base. So there's another situation where you had 2 guys for the same team that hit over 500.
When you look at those guys, it makes it easy to remember them. They stick out a lot more than when you go to a team like the Mets, where you start thinking about who hit the most home runs for the Mets, and you're just like, well, that's not as easy. There's because Piazza was probably the best hitter that ever played for the Mets, but I don't think he was there long enough to get the most home runs.
We're Met fans, so
we know who it
that's
is.
a Met fan knows that right now. Pete Alonso, who is not yet signed by the Mets,
is 20-something away.
Is trying to catch Darryl Strawberry, who's number 1, but number 2 between them is David Wright.
Right, and so I think Alonso, provided he re-signs the Mets, will become the all-time franchise home run leader. It's inevitable.
And so I guess when I saw that Machado I think he had 167. He has 167 now home runs with the Padres, and I'm thinking that's not very many for a guy who has the most. Well, Strawberry's 252 ain't that many either for the Mets, but thank goodness there's the Padres there to show you that there's another team with less.
Right, because it's even funnier because then you look at a team like the Nationals, where if you look at that franchise that exists both as a Washington and a Montreal team, it's not the easiest because you got to think that not a lot of guys played a ton of seasons for that franchise. So you're thinking could it be a guy like Tim Raines? Could it be a guy like Vlad Guerrero Jr.? It's actually Ryan Zimmerman.
It is Ryan Zimmerman. I'm thinking, wow, I wouldn't. That is not what have came to mind. Didn't Andre Dawson hit more home runs for the No, because he went to the Cubs and he hit a ton of home runs for them.
Gary Carter split his home runs between the Expos and the Mets. Tim Wallach only hit 204 in his career.
I
Harper
liked Tim Wallach.
Harper wasn't there for long enough, and so he'll split his career home runs too much between the Phillies and the Nationals to really be high up on either of their lists. And then what's funny is, like, then you go to a team like the Florida Marlins, who have existed for far less time than the New York Mets. But they have a franchise leader that's hit more home runs for them than the Mets have, because Giancarlo Stanton has hit 267 for home runs for the Miami Marlins, which kind of just speaks to the insane run he had while he was there, because he wasn't even there that long.
He hasn't hit one there in a long time.
No.
And here's the thing. I don't really see anybody catching him right now. There's nobody in the organization.
No, there's nobody that's even been playing. Jake Berger? I think they traded him.
He's gone. He's gone.
Right.
So Sheffield could have been the guy.
The tricky thing is naming the second guy on the Marlins list, because that's a deep cut where I think only an NL East fan would be aware of who this guy is.
No way. And then when I found it out, Dan Ugla.
Right. Only an NL East guy, because he also had a couple good years for the
Braves. Right.
So NL East fans will remember that. And
but he had 154 way behind Stanton's 267.
And Miguel Cabrera left too early. He had 138, but he had way more for the Tigers, who will eventually end up talking about.
You might have guessed Hanley Ramirez might have been in the top 5,
right,
which he is. He's third.
But Mike Lowell?
Mike Lowell you wouldn't have guessed.
No.
Came up as a
Yankee,
by the way.
I might have guessed him because I used him in MVP Baseball 2005, but that's a very specific reference.
Yeah, so I think that they have somebody that has more than like you said, than the Padres and the Mets. For a team that's only been around since 1993, and that means something. Now, on the other hand, the Cincinnati Reds.
Right, when you move to the Central, you have a bunch of teams that have a lot more history, and it's interesting because when you think about the other teams, when you think about the Cubs, the Cardinals, and the Pirates. Brewers notwithstanding, because they're a bit of a weird team in the NL Central. But when we think about the other three teams, you can immediately think of, like, a guy for them. And even though the Reds have had plenty of Hall of Fame players, you think of Johnny Bench, and then you're just like, who else could Johnny be? Did anybody else even hit 400 home runs for them?
Well, Johnny Bench didn't even hit 4 home runs. And that surprised me for a team that is the oldest team in the National League. They've been around for 150 years almost. Johnny Bench is the number 1 home run hitter with 389.
With Votto kind of just trailing.
Votto is second.
Right, Votto is second at 352.
356.
356, right. And then you've got Frank Robinson, who's at 324. Who lost home runs if he had played his whole career with them.
He would be, because he's got over 500 career home
runs. Right, but he had a bunch of home runs with the Orioles.
Correct. Well, much to my chagrin, obviously, watching him play, and he was an amazing player. I'm surprised that Tony Perez has only 287 career home runs. This is a Hall of Fame player. I think he had 389 career home runs, which is fewer than I thought, because I thought everybody on that old Big Red Machine was hitting a home run, every other time.
You have to remember that this is a list of home runs hit with this team. Like, that's why Adam Dunn is 4th at 200 and at 5th at 270. And I think that's why it's interesting to think about it, because it's about hitting them with a team, and with the advent of free agency, guys don't spend their whole careers with one team. So if you're a prodigious home run hitter, you're probably just not going to get all of them with that team.
And they had a player named Ted Kluzinski, who was known as Big Clue, and he was famous for wearing cut-off sleeves. And he had these big arms, and so guys didn't do that at the time, so it was a bit intimidating to have his big arms and all this stuff. And he was a home run hitter at a time where people weren't hitting that many home runs. So he's got only 251, and he's 6th on the Reds list, but he actually was a really good home run hitter for the time that he played in. You just didn't, he wasn't a guy named Willie Mays.
There is a point where we're starting to give a little bit too much credit, I think, when it's like, he's 6th all time for the Reds at 250. It's like, okay,
behind Adam Dunn,
right? You're right. Is this guy really that impressive? But then you go to the Cardinals, and I think this one's interesting because you could think of 2 guys immediately on the top of that list, and it's about who hit more of their home runs with the Cardinals. Musial pretty much only played for the Cardinals, but how many?
Not pretty much.
But how many of Albert Pujols' 600 home runs did he hit with the Cardinals? Is the tricky thing to think about.
Yeah, well, and he hit a lot more with the Angels
than you think.
And I thought that surprised me because Pujols is only 7 or 6 behind. Yeah, he's only 6 behind Musial.
Right, he's
with the Cardinals. 469 for the Cardinals.
Right, but that means he hit a lot. He hit like 100.
He hit almost 200 home runs.
Right, with them, where Musial hit 475
for the Angels.
And then it gets hard because there's a drop off after that.
Another guy who played for the Cardinals and the Angels, Jim Edmonds,
was fourth because Ken Boyer is third.
The late Ken Boyer had just passed away, and I would have never guessed that. I just I liked the guy when he won. Came to the Mets after he'd won an MVP, and in just so Metsian fashion,
he was terrible.
He was terrible. So and it didn't work out for the Mets, but he was a really good ball player and a Hall of Fame almost guy. Without
and then McGuire just put too much of his career between Oakland and St. Louis to actually be high up on this list. He only hit 220 while he was in St. Louis.
And the guy who's fifth is a guy that I bet you have never heard of, Ray Lankford.
I want to say I've heard the name, but I could also just be saying I heard the name.
He played on those good Cardinal teams in the 80s, and I remember he was a good
player.
Maybe
I saw him when he was an old man.
But the point is that he's fifth all time in the Cardinals history.
Well, hitting 200 because it's, again, not
I didn't think he hit that many home runs.
Right. People didn't hit a ton of – when guys played their whole careers for one team, people didn't play – anybody but the superstars didn't hit a ton of home runs. And by the time the guys started regularly hitting home runs across Major League Baseball, free agency was here, so guys don't spend their whole team with career with one team.
Well, unlike, and you mentioned him already, right? Ernie Banks for the Cubs hit all his home runs for the Cubs. Billy Williams didn't play every season, but he played almost his entire career for the Cubs. Hall of Famer, hit 392. He is second on the Cub
Ron
list.
Santo, Hall of Famer, played all but 1 year for the Cubs.
Yeah, I don't know. He went. Remember, I always talk about that crummy. Last year, he went to the White Sox across town and didn't do anything because he just.
Right, but then you fall off because after I think you're thinking oh yeah, who else could it be? And then you're just like, oh wait,
Ryan Sandberg.
There's a guy we are all forgetting. And he just came out recently and made a big apology for some of his actions as a ball player. But then you're like, oh, yeah, Sammy Sosa played for the Chicago Cubs. And it's always wild to think about. There have been 6 60-home run seasons in Major League Baseball.
3 of them.
3 of them were by Sammy Sosa. And in all those years, he did not win
the home run title.
Somebody else hit 60 home runs.
That's great. And I'm personally just so happy that Sammy Sosa is going to be finally back in the good graces of the Chicago Cubs. And I guess Sammy being Sammy, like a lot of these guys, their personalities, but watching him play was a joy.
There was a little bit more with Sammy being Sammy.
Well, obviously, you had the allegations as to,
right, that's what I mean. Rickey being Rickey never quite reached that level.
But Sammy, that obviously the home run race with McGuire in '98, and just in general, watching a Sammy Sosa at bat was really, really exciting. So,
right. And then you go back to the Pirates, and this becomes a little bit easier just because we were like, well, they haven't had anybody good there in a while, and Bonds played more of his career with the
definitely
Giants
not
as
Bonds,
a big homer. But then you think like, okay, they've got a couple home run hitting Hall of Famers. You're like Willie Stargell, yeah, he's probably up there. Ralph Kiner, yeah, he's probably up there.
Well, and Ralph Kiner only played the 10 seasons, so that's why his career home run totals are not.
And Clemente,
higher.
Wasn't a super home run hitter, so you kind of after that you're like, well, it kind of has to be one of those two guys.
I was surprised that Clemente hit 240 home runs for the Pirates. I mean, that's
way. I think it's more surprising that that's third.
I didn't think right, and Stargell, oddly enough, hit 475 home runs, just like Stan Musial, and I think that's very cool.
And you know what? It's interesting because Andrew McCutchen's at 235. Did he retire this offseason, or is he playing one more?
I have not heard him retiring yet.
Right, so if he plays one more with the Pirates, he'll probably end up passing Clemente for third all time, and he will not be a Hall of Famer, but he'll probably have his number retired by the Pirates.
I'd say he'll definitely have his number retired. So the Brewers started as the Seattle Pilots, and no, there were no home run hitters for the Seattle Pirates.
But it is interesting because the Brewers are a team much like the San Diego Padres, where you start thinking about who it could be, and it gets really hard.
Right. It's like who, and again, I can remember these older names when the Brewers made that World Series back in the early 80s, and they had Gorman Thomas and a guy named Ben Ogilvy, and most people have long since forgotten those guys. You knew they had Robin Yount, the Hall of Famer, but you're like, that guy's not a...
Was Greg Vaughn their all-time home run leader?
I remember he hit a lot of home runs for the Padres, too, so I didn't think of it that way, but none of those guys are the number one home run hitter.
Because it's Ryan Braun with 352, which is trouncing everybody else there.
Right, he's got over 100 more than Robin Yount, who's got 251, and Prince Fielder with 230. So it's just, to me, amazing that a guy who, again, he's got the allegation issues, with him too, and who had a much better career. When you look at his career going, That's actually a pretty good career. Why don't I like that career that much?
Oh, yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he wasn't a very good fielder, but
he was kind of a crummy guy.
He hit for average. He hit home runs. The dude could hit.
Right, but he was just a very good hitter.
Yeah. And obviously an almost guy on his best day. Gorman Thomas is a name that also I remember. And
that's
he was
just a name
big burly guy.
That's more just because of the name.
Mustache and all that. He had 208 home runs, but that's only good for fifth on the Brewers. So, we talked about the Giants already a little bit. And
right, it's Bonds and Mays, and then you have to just think about
Mel Ott,
and you're like, okay, wow, Willie McCovey. So it's like, wow, the Giants' top four is way better than most teams' top four. I mean, even their fourth place guy is better than most teams' first guy.
And I was surprised at how much I'd forgotten that Willie McCovey played elsewhere. That he went to the Padres for 3 years and he played for the A's. I just only remember him as a Giant.
Right. Because he didn't do anything in those years.
No, yeah, that was late in his career. So, and Matt Williams, that was something that I thought about. Gee, and he did show up.
Right, you know what? Yeah, he had 247 career home runs.
Good ball player.
Good ball player. It's an impressive number of home runs to hit because not a lot of people can hit 250 career major league home runs.
And I don't think Orlando Cepeda died this year, but he's died in the past couple of years. He's fifth with 226 on the all-time Giant list. So look, the Giants have always been a sort of a home run hitting team. And interesting because Candlestick Park, where they formerly played, was not a home run hitter's park.
No, but obviously somehow playing in the Polo Grounds.
Well, the Polo Grounds down the right field line. As you remember, I talked about when they built Yankee Stadium in 1923. Ruth had played there while they were building it in 21 and 22, and he hit all those home runs to the right field porch, and they just made the dimensions the same.
Right.
And
the new park is kind of held on to that because the ball seems to fly out there, unlike their not cross town, but cross state rivals in the Los Angeles Dodgers, where if you look at their all-time home run list, the conclusion you come away from looking at it is, wow, playing in L.A. stinks if you're a home run hitter.
Right. Ebbets Field was definitely the better home run hitter's park for sure.
Because you're thinking about think about it as you at home right now. Think about it. Los Angeles Dodgers all-time home run hitters.
Matt Kemp.
Right. It gets hard.
Sean Green?
You're putting up Kirk Gibson, and then you look at his career, and you're like, oh, wait, no, it's not.
No.
It is stunning that if you're just looking at Los Angeles guys, it is somebody that probably nobody but the deepest of deep Dodger fans is knowing, and that's probably not off the top of their head, and Eric Karros at 270.
Isn't he a broadcaster?
I think 270. He's beating out Roy Campanella. I think this was what made it hard for me. It was like all the guys at the top of this list I literally never saw play.
Right. You didn't even see the guy who's fifth, Ron Say, who played third base on those Dodger, great Dodger infields, back in the 80s. In the 80s and all that stuff. They played a billion years together.
The top two are Duke Snider and Gil Hodges.
Yeah, and again,
two all-time players, obviously, Hall of Famers.
Two Hall of Fame players, and Campanella. The only reason he doesn't have more home runs is obviously the tragic accident that robbed him of the rest of his career, or else he would probably have another 100 or 200 home runs.
Right, he'd be up there with Hodges.
But actually, I think he got injured just before they moved to Los Angeles, so he never had to hit in Dodger Stadium. Probably that probably did help a little bit.
Now, obviously, we go down to San Diego then, and they're sort of the team
we
kicked it off with it being Machado. So I think that's just interesting because you'd think somebody up there, because they've got the lowest until I think we look at some of the AL teams, just because nobody's ever hit a ton of home runs playing in Tampa Bay. But when we go to Colorado, I think Colorado just surprises me because you'd think there'd be more guys.
Right, with the number of people hitting home runs in general, Dante Bichette having a 40 home run season in Colorado, Vinny Castilla being a good home run hitter.
He was third with 240.
I wasn't surprised, right, because he was a really good hitter for a long time there.
Arenado only hit 235 while he was there. Carlos Gonzalez.
That surprised me. Cargo being that high on the list.
Charlie Blackmon, I think, now retired.
Yes, he did.
Right. He's right behind Cargo at 224. But obviously the top two are their two Hall of Famers in Larry Walker, who had 258 career home runs, and then Helton hit 369,
so he's another guy who's more than 100 ahead of the second guy in Colorado. So you think if anybody could get caught in Colorado, you just get it like, I'm just saying, let's say Pete Alonso came up with the Rockies, and was playing there his whole career, and he played 15 years there. He may hit 240 his whole career, but he probably hit 500 home runs.
Because I think what's interesting is when you see the guys that you would expect to be able to just sort of park, like you're looking at an Adam Dunn type player. Like, if you just parked a guy like Adam Dunn in Colorado for 13 seasons, he'd be their all-time home run hitter. But the problem with a player that profiles like that is they're good for your team for a season. you're probably always going to be able to look at the field and think you can upgrade from that because it's such a one-dimensional player. So I think the chance of you having just a guy that hits a lot of home runs end up as your franchise leader these days is pretty low because you're going to get rid of him.
I'm still surprised, though. Let's stay on this a moment.
Yeah.
So Colorado, when you think about it, like anybody that goes to Colorado, their entire offensive statistical line improves across the board. Batting average, because it's a big ballpark, you hit more doubles and triples there because of the way the ballpark is
right, but if you're
configured.
Colorado, you bring in a guy, you sign him for 4 years, $60 million. He hits a bunch of home runs from you. It's time to re-sign him. Well, you could pay him a bunch of money for a similar performance, but you're like, we could just go get another version of that guy and pay him $60 million again and just keep doing this over and over. And then we never have to shell out a ton of money for performance that we could always recreate in the aggregate.
And I think that, as I was saying before, and I was trying to make the point, I did a bad job of it, is we think the configuration of Coors Field is that it's a home run hitter's park. It's actually more of an extra base hitter's park because of the way that it is. So that's why guys get doubles and triples, and when they're not necessarily going to get them in other
balls
places
that would normally be
they
caught
get out
keep
to the
carrying
wall
into the gaps.
Right. But I'm just surprised that they don't have a 400 home run guy.
Well, it's also they've
how
got
good.
really cheap owners who never choose to keep any of their good players around. Arenado would have probably passed Helton had they kept him.
I mean, that's an interesting point because I would have thought Helton would have somehow made it to 400 because he had some big home run seasons.
Right, but
he had a 49 homer season.
Right, but he was never as much as a home run hitter.
Not a
as
pure
he was
home run
good
hitter.
hitter.
Right,
and he was a good batting
And they
average.
really haven't had pure home run hitters.
No. Right, and just because we can't forget them here, because we don't want to shortchange the Arizona Diamondbacks as one of the newer teams on this list. I think it's what's interesting is when you think about them, they've actually had a bunch of guys that have hit a bunch of home runs for him because, you're surprised, but I guess Arizona's a good home run hitting ballpark.
Well, and it is. It's a good hitting ballpark, which I think, it's possible that the, Diamondbacks who went and signed a first baseman since they lost Christian Walker, they're going to find that, that all of a sudden the friendly confines there,
It's just impressive to me that the San Diego Padres have existed for far longer than the Arizona Diamondbacks, but the Arizona Diamondbacks have Luis Gonzalez leading them at 224, which is far ahead of what the Padres have.
And Luis Gonzalez has about 357 career home. No,
that's Finley.
300. No, he has 300 career homers,
right?
Meaning that he hit them for other teams. And again, another guy who I think has an underrated Hall of Fame candidate. Finley has 300 career home runs, but he wasn't number one.
Right, because he hit most of his home runs with other teams. Goldschmidt left; he would have probably hit 300 with them.
I agree.
Christian Walker would have maybe gotten to 200 with them.
But there's a guy moving up the list.
Right. How high do you think Marte is going to get?
He's only got he's got 135. So you would think that the team record of 224 is well within reach for Ketel Marte, right? I mean, he's got to get less than 100 home runs to take it over. But he's already 28 or 29, and you're not sure that power will last another 8 or 9 years for him to
he's
getting
31.
up to 300. He's 31. There we go.
Right, and this was the first year where his home run, he hit 32 in 2019, so everybody was like, oh, wow, okay, this is sort of him breaking out. But then he didn't hit for power in 21 or 22. You had the COVID season, and then last season or the season before he had 25, and then last season he hit 36. So if he can keep doing that, but now he's got to hit 36 for
No, I think
3 seasons in a row.
He hits 25 homers for the next 4 years average. That's possible.
Right, he can't have a couple seasons of
12
or 15.
Yes, exactly. He's going to have to, but he's got to average, so he could have a 30 home run season.
Right, but
against
it's just tough.
against a 20.
If you look at his career, he's basically played 6 full seasons since the age of 24. In 3 of those seasons, he hit less than 15 home runs. In 3 of those seasons, he hit 25 or more home runs. I don't know what to expect out of that.
And I think being a late starter at the major league level, which goes 24, I think these days is a little bit of a late starter. Not
well, that was his first big season because he started at 21.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry.
In Seattle. But I was saying that was 24 was his breakout season in 2018.
Yeah. So I think, it surprises me, that Luis Gonzalez is the number one guy for the Diamondbacks. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we will do, the next podcast we'll do will be, and we'll wish everybody a happy Merry
Happy
Christmas.
holidays and a Merry Christmas.
We are going to do another episode that'll come out a week from now. So between Christmas and New Year's, it'll be the AL version of this podcast. We'll do all the AL teams and
and look forward to an
interview
interview with Adam Dabrowski.
Aaron Dorowski, who
sorry.
of Baseball Reference, is going to come on with us. He'll be on the podcast on the 7th, and he's going to talk about the cool things he's been cooking up over there at Baseball Reference. So there's a lot of baseball to talk about. We hope you have a great time with your families, and thanks for listening.